Xena Harlock squinted at the view screen, her ship's systems flickering as if even they didn't believe what they were seeing. A derelict vessel, if you could even call it that, drifted at the edge of the Tenebrae Nebula, its surface bristling with jagged, organic-looking ridges. It didn't resemble any known ship design. No serial numbers, no corporate logos, no identifiable hull structure. It was alien in every sense of the word, a twisted amalgamation of bone-white material that seemed to grow in irregular patterns, as though it were less a constructed ship and more a living thing that had petrified over time. "Command, I have a visual on." "Well, something?" Xena muttered into her calm. She didn't expect a response. The nebula's interference would likely garble her message. As her salvager, Dust Warden, crept closer, the details of the ship came into stark relief. Pockmarks along the hull that looked like old wounds, sprawling tendrils that had long since gone rigid, and a gaping rent near what might have once been an airlock. She activated the external scans. Her ship's AI, MAGs, chirped a moment later. Composition unknown, detecting traces of ultradense polymer alloys and unidentified crystalline lattices. Biosignatures are inconclusive. No active power sources. In other words, it was as dead as it looked. But even dead things could hold value. "Mags, prep the grapplers. I'm going in." The Dust Warden shifted into position, its mechanical arms extending toward the jagged opening. Xena slipped on her EVA suit and sealed her helmet, the heads-up display flaring to life. A short hop later, she was drifting through the void toward the alien wreck. As she entered through the torn section of the hull, her lights swept across the interior. The walls were smooth and glistening, as though carved from polished bone. Jagged spikes jutted out at intervals, giving the corridors an almost predatory feel. Whatever this ship had been, it hadn't been built for comfort. Xena floated forward cautiously, her tether lines snaking behind her. The interior was eerily intact. No blast marks, no signs of an explosion, just the silent evidence of time's relentless decay. She made her way deeper, her scanner beeping as it picked up something ahead. A faint signal almost lost in the static. Her pulse quickened. Alien artifacts could be worth a fortune, and even the smallest piece of tech from an unknown species might change the course of human engineering. As she rounded a corner, she found the source. A faint glow emanated from a chamber up ahead. Its entrance was framed by two jagged pillars that looked more like ribs than structural supports. She floated inside, her lights illuminating what appeared to be a central console, or at least something that served a similar purpose. It was an intricate tangle of conduits and crystalline surfaces, with threads of glowing blue veins running through it. "Bingo!" Xena whispered. She activated her cutting tools, preparing to detach a section for analysis. As the tool's beam sliced into the material, the glow suddenly intensified. She pulled back, her heart hammering as the chamber lit up with a deep, pulsing light. The air or lack thereof seemed to hum around her. "Command, I think I might have dashed," she began. But her words were cut off as a sudden force clamped down on her arm. She gasped and turned, only to see a tendril-like extension from the console wrapped around her forearm. The suit's integrity alarm blared as the material pressed against her glove. She tried to yank her arm free, but the tendril held firm. Within seconds, the glowing blue veins began spreading, creeping onto her arm and fusing with the outer layer of her suit. Her left arm was now anchored to the console as if it were part of the ship itself. "Damn it! Mags! Get me out of here!" she shouted. But before she could react further, a voice low and echoing spoke inside her helmet. "Do not resist. The union has begun." Xena froze, her breath hitching. The voice was synthetic yet strangely melodic. It was unlike anything she had ever heard. And it wasn't coming from her suit's comm system. It was coming from the console or whatever alien intelligence had just awakened. "Who are you? What do you want?" she demanded. The glowing tendrils pulsated as if in response. "Preservation of knowledge. Integration of the living with the eternal. The interface must not be severed." Her stomach sank. Whatever this ship was, it wasn't just a derelict hulk. It was alive, or at least its systems were, and it had no intention of letting her go. Xena struggled again, but the alien material only tightened its grip. She knew her only hope was to send out a distress signal and pray anyone would come to her aid. With her free hand, she activated her emergency beacon, setting it to broadcast continuously. It was a long shot, especially out here in the middle of nowhere, but she had no other choice. As the voice continued speaking in its cryptic, soothing tones, Xena's mind raced. If no one came, she might never leave this ship. And if they did, what would they find? A salvage pilot fused to an alien console, her body partially consumed by its strange, glowing veins. As panic set in, Xena could only hope the distress call would reach someone before the ship or whatever intelligence controlled it decided she was no longer useful. Xena's distress signal echoed out into the dark, empty reaches of space, pinging off dormant satellites and derelict relay stations until it found ears willing to listen. The response came faster than she'd expected, only a few standard days after the signal was sent. A sleek, gunmetal gray vessel slid into view on her ship's failing radar. At first glance, it resembled a deep space surveyor or a private research craft, but Xena recognized the insignia emblazoned on its hull. An abstract, angular M, enclosed in a hexagonal shield. It was a Mender's ship. She had heard of the Menders before, renowned engineers and cyberneticists who traveled the frontier, solving problems that no one else dared to touch. When they weren't building elegant cybernetic solutions for the wealthy elite, they took on salvage jobs, helping ship crews repair, retrofit, or, in extreme cases, amputate parts of their own bodies that had become fused with hostile technology. Their reputation was formidable, their fees exorbitant, and their methods sometimes controversial. Xena's stomach tightened as the ship docked and a small crew of 4 stepped into her vessel's airlock. Their leader, Anders Velt, entered first. He wasn't what she had expected. He looked more like a mechanic than a high-tech engineer. His jumpsuit was plain, his boots scuffed, and his arms were crossed over a broad chest that seemed more comfortable hefting equipment than typing complex code. His eyes, however, were sharp and calculating. His crew followed behind. 2 technicians who carried toolkits brimming with modular components, and a tall, lanky surgeon whose belt gleamed with an array of sterile surgical instruments. Anders wasted no time. "You're Xena Harlock?" His voice was low, clipped, the kind of voice that demanded answers. She nodded, cradling her arm that was no longer entirely hers. "Good. Let's see what we're dealing with." She led him to the medbay, where she had propped herself up after her first encounter with the alien vessel's security system. The machine that had locked onto her arm had spread across her shoulder like creeping ivy. Smooth black plating interspersed with alien markings covered her flesh, and the deeper it had grown, the more it had fused with her own tissues. Small lights pulsed faintly within the device, and faintly audible clicks, almost like a heart valve opening and closing, emanated from the machinery. It was more than a foreign object. It was alive in some way she didn't fully understand. Anders and his team studied her arm for several minutes. He scanned it with devices that hummed softly, made notes on a datapad, and murmured commands to his crew. Finally, he turned to her. "This isn't your average salvage tech," Anders said, crouching beside her. "I don't know what kind of ship you stumbled into, but whatever this is, it's old. Old and hostile." Xena gritted her teeth. "Just get it off me. I don't care how. I'm not losing my arm over this." Anders stood and exchanged a look with the surgeon. "Getting it off you might be easier said than done. If we attempt to cut it away, we risk causing systemic damage. Not just to the arm, but to you. And if we try to disable it while it's still attached, well, we could be dealing with an explosive failsafe or a complete neural shutdown. That's worst-case scenario, but it's on the table." Xena's heart sank. "So what's your plan? You're the expert. How do I keep my arm?" Anders rubbed his chin, his expression a mix of curiosity and calculation. "There might be another way. We're not just hackers, Ms. Harlock. We don't give up easily. But it's going to take time. I need to understand this tech, what it's doing to you, why it's bonding to you. If we can figure that out, we might be able to isolate it and remove it safely. Maybe even turn it into something you can control rather than something that controls you. Xena narrowed her eyes. You're not seriously suggesting you leave this thing on me? For now, Anders said calmly. If we jump straight to cutting, we might lose everything. But if we can learn more, we might turn a liability into an asset. You have to trust me. Trust you? She snapped. I called you to fix this, not to experiment on me. I don't want to be your test subject. Anders's gaze hardened. I'm not looking for a guinea pig. I'm looking for a solution. But if you'd rather roll the dice on another crew, be my guest. The room fell silent. Xena stared at him, anger and fear warring inside her. She didn't like the idea of waiting. She didn't like the idea of being a project. But the alternative was losing her arm or worse. Fine, she said finally. But I'm not waiting forever. Figure this out fast. And no experiments that I don't approve. Understood, Anders said, nodding. We'll get started immediately. I just need you to keep still and stay calm. As the menders set up their equipment and began their analysis, Xena leaned back in her chair. The alien device pulsed faintly against her skin, its rhythmic clicks like a second heartbeat. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the anxiety clawing at her chest. For the first time since that damn ship had ensnared her, she felt a glimmer of hope. Not much, but just enough to cling to. As Anders delved deeper into the alien machinery fused to Xena's arm, he began to unravel a story far older than humanity's venture into the stars. The device wasn't just a piece of technology, it was a remnant of a civilization that had once thrived at the galaxy's edge. What started as simple surface scans turned into a full-fledged data decryption effort. The further Anders dug, the more he found. Fragments of ancient language, complex genetic markers, and a tangled web of code that seemed to be adapting to Xena's biology. We're not just dealing with a tool here, Anders explained one evening after hours of analysis. This thing, it's almost like a seed. It's meant to integrate, to grow. That's why it fused to you rather than just locking onto you. It's symbiotic. Xena raised an eyebrow, still cradling her arm carefully. Symbiotic? What are you saying? That this thing wants to work with me? Not exactly, Anders said. I think it was designed to adapt to a host. But it's not malicious, not on purpose, at least. It's doing what it was built to do. The problem is, it doesn't know you. It doesn't know humans. It only knows its creators, and they've been gone a long time. That's why it's treating your arm as raw material, molding it, reworking it. It's trying to make sense of you. Yeah, well, I don't want to be its science project, Xena replied sharply. I just want my arm back. Anders nodded. I know, and I think we can manage that. But I'll need your help. It wasn't just a throwaway line. Anders' plan depended on Xena's own willpower and ingenuity. Rather than relying solely on his team's expertise, he wanted to involve her in the process. Over the next several days, Anders guided her through a series of exercises that weren't purely physical, they were mental and emotional. He taught her how to focus her thoughts in certain ways, how to concentrate on the arm and visualize it responding to her commands. Slowly, Xena began to notice changes. The clicks and hums within the device grew less erratic. The cold, alien sensation that had pervaded her arm since the fusion started to fade. For the first time, she felt a faint connection and awareness that wasn't entirely hers but wasn't hostile either. It was as if the device had started to learn from her, to recognize her as a living, thinking being instead of just a host. Meanwhile, Anders worked tirelessly to find a safe method of detachment. Every piece of data he decrypted provided new insights into the device's inner workings. He discovered that the alien makers had once faced their own extinction event, and the technology bonded to Xena's arm was a desperate last-ditch effort to preserve their knowledge and abilities. It was a survival mechanism, not a weapon. And in its strange alien logic, it saw Xena as a chance to carry on that legacy. When Anders presented this theory to Xena, she stared at him in disbelief. You're saying this thing wants me to carry on their race? I'm not some chosen savior, Anders. I'm just a scavenger who stumbled onto the wrong ship at the wrong time. I don't think it cares about saviors or destiny, Anders said. It's not conscious in the way we think of consciousness. It's a machine following its programming. It just found you. You're here, you're alive, and it's trying to survive through you. Xena shook her head. That doesn't make this any better. It just means it's not going to stop until it gets what it wants. Not necessarily, Anders said. We've made progress. You've been communicating with it. Don't think I haven't noticed. You're influencing it, even if it's just a little. I think if we keep pushing, we can turn this situation around. For Xena, the days that followed were a strange blend of exhaustion and exhilaration. On one hand, she was still angry and scared, frustrated by the fact that her body had been invaded. On the other, she couldn't ignore the small victories. The way she had started to sense the device's mood. The faint response it gave when she focused her thoughts a certain way. Anders' guidance was paying off, even if the end result wasn't yet clear. Then, at last, Anders found the breakthrough he was looking for. Deep within the alien data core, he discovered a dormant function, something that resembled a failsafe or reset mechanism. If triggered correctly, it could separate the device from Xena's arm without destroying her or the machinery. It was a risky move, but it was the best chance they had. You're sure about this? Xena asked as Anders prepared the final sequence. No tricks, no surprises? I'm not going to lie, Anders said. It's risky, but I think you've already shown you're tougher than this thing. We've come this far, and I think we can go the rest of the way. Xena took a deep breath. She had trusted Anders this far. She couldn't back out now. All right, let's do it. Anders activated the failsafe. First, nothing seemed to happen. Then Xena felt a sharp jolt in her arm, followed by a wave of heat that spread through her entire body. The machine's lights flared brightly, and for a moment, it was all she could do to keep herself from screaming. But then, just as suddenly as it began, the sensation stopped. She opened her eyes. The black plating on her arm had loosened, sliding off like dead skin. Anders quickly moved in, using a precision tool to sever the last few connections. When it was done, Xena's arm, bruised, scarred, but intact, was finally free. I'll need to run a few more tests, but it looks like it worked, Anders said, a small smile breaking through his normally stoic demeanor. Xena flexed her fingers, feeling the cool air on her skin for the first time in weeks. A wave of relief washed over her. You actually did it. No, Anders said. We did it. I couldn't have done this without you. She let out a long, shaky laugh, the tension finally breaking. Well, I guess humans really don't give up that easily, do we? The detachment process left Xena's arm raw and aching, but more importantly, it left her intact. For the first time in weeks, her body was her own again. The alien machinery now lay dormant on a workbench, its smooth black plating stripped away to reveal a gleaming core of shimmering, iridescent material. Despite its inert appearance, Xena could sense something still lingering in the device, some faint echo of the alien intelligence that had once held her captive. Anders and his team continued to run tests on the core. The more they examined it, the clearer it became that they weren't dealing with simple technology. The core was an archive, a living repository of knowledge from a civilization long gone. Through careful decryption, Anders began uncovering schematics for advanced energy sources, environmental terraforming systems, and even theoretical designs for faster-than-light propulsion methods far beyond anything currently known. The implications were staggering. This is a once-in-a-lifetime find, Anders told Xena one evening. I've spent my entire career chasing after scraps of technology from extinct species, but this could redefine everything. If we share these designs, we're talking about advancing human civilization by centuries, terraforming uninhabitable worlds, exploring parts of the galaxy we never thought reachable, fixing the damage we've done to Earth. Xena leaned back in her seat, rubbing her arm absent-mindedly. And all of it was buried on that derelict ship, just floating out there. Like it was waiting for someone to find it. Anders nodded. Or waiting for someone to prove they could survive it. Xena raised an eyebrow. You think this was some kind of test? Not intentionally, Anders replied. The technology's creators built it to preserve themselves. They didn't anticipate humans finding it, but when you stumbled onto their ship, the device treated you as a host. And you proved you could adapt, that you could push back against its programming and make it listen. It's not about destiny, it's about persistence. Xena was quiet for a moment. So what happens now? You're going to take all this tech back to the core worlds, hand it over to the corporations or the government? Not quite, Anders said, a faint smile playing at his lips. You've been through hell, Xena. I think you deserve a say in what happens to this. And frankly, I'm not about to let this fall into the wrong hands. We'll release the data slowly, in pieces. Make sure it's handled responsibly. Xena's lips twitched into a smile of her own. Responsibly? That's not a word you hear much out here on the frontier. Well, maybe it's time we start, Anders said. Besides, you've earned a stake in this. You're part of the story now. Xena glanced over at the dormant core on the workbench. It looked almost peaceful now, a far cry from the living nightmare it had been when it was fused to her arm. But she knew its secrets were still alive, waiting to be unlocked. Guess I can't argue with that, she said, standing up. Her arm was still tender, the scars still fresh, but for the first time, she felt whole. But let's be clear, if I ever see another piece of alien tech again, I'm running the other way. Anders chuckled. Fair enough. Though, knowing you, I don't think you'd be able to resist. As the crew prepared to leave, Xena took one last look out of the ship's viewport. The alien vessel still loomed in the distance, its dark, angular silhouette a stark reminder of what she had endured. But she no longer saw it as a source of terror. Instead, it was a symbol of humanity's ability to survive, adapt, and rise above impossible odds.